Again, my name is Maureen Cathy. I am the career coach for our graduate programs, and am excited today to be able to kind of do a presentation for you that hopefully will be helpful in answering some questions about networking, interview prep, things that you can be doing to really be able to tell your story. And I think it's the piece of interviewing that people often overlook and are thinking, how do I answer the questions? And really it's about kind of understanding and knowing your story and yourself and being able then to convey that in an interview or in a networking situation. So that's what we're going to kind of go over today. And I'm just going to got multiple screens going on here. So, all right. And we'll also have time for questions at the end as well. So if you have something, but it's not maybe quite as relevant to what we're talking about at that moment, we will definitely leave some time to cover those later. All right. So the first key, like I said, really to be able to tell your story is to research and understand yourself a little better and make sure that you know what your brand is. You know what information you want to relay about yourself, whether it be in that networking situation, whether it be in an interview. It kind of seems pretty easy. You're like, well, I know who I am. But I would imagine if I put someone on the spot right now, and I won't, but if I put someone on the spot right now and asked you to tell me your strengths and what is the best things about you, what's going to really get you this job or this position, it might be a little daunting. It might take you a second, to answer that question and to think of those strengths and those skills. And maybe you could think of those, but then would it be something that draws me in? Would it be something that makes me want to know more about you and continue that conversation? For most people, it's a challenge to do that on the spur of the moment. So researching yourself, just like we talked about researching a position or a company that you're going to interview with or apply for a job with, we really want to do some of that research of our individual selves as well, so that we can be prepared with the language that we need when it comes time to that networking or interviewing situation. So in order to develop that language to talk positively about yourself and establish your brand, be unique, among the crowd. Obviously, these recruiters, if you're, going for a job or even just in your networking out in the world, people, they see a lot maybe of similar people, similar backgrounds, business degree, getting that MBA, whatever it might be, that graduate level degree. And so you want to find a way to have yourself stand out, to establish yourself, to be unique. Recruiters often hear those words of like, well, I'm a hardworking, good communicator and a great leader, which are all good qualities to have. But they really want, that obviously is something that people just roll off the tongue and it sounds good and you think that's what they want to hear. They really want to get to know you and your unique and individual strengths and the skills that help you to be a good communicator and a good leader, and to be hardworking. What are you utilizing in terms of your strengths and skills? They want to know the real you, how you're going to add value to their organization, and that position that they might be considering you for. So we want to be sure that in your toolkit, in your toolbox, that you have stronger words to use than maybe the generic tried and true, everybody uses them kind of words. We want to be able then to relate those words and those strengths and talents to the position that you're trying to achieve, to what they're looking for. So again, that's that knowledge of the connection between maybe that job description or things that are really strong skills and traits that that employer might be looking for in that field. And then you also want to be able to back it up. So it's not just a matter of picking these words that might describe you or finding some great unique ways to talk about yourself, but you want to back it up with examples, show you are rather than just say you are. We often talk about that in, when you're answering those questions about tell me about yourself, when you are, if somebody just said, what are your strengths? And you just said some words, that's saying that's what you are. Showing it would be giving those examples to back that up. So we want to be able to do that too. So we're going to flex our vocabulary muscles. We're going to think about different language. We're going to do some thoughts about how to really come up with those strengths that really describe you to the best ability and create that brand for yourself. So in order to do this, there are some tools that I want to mention to you. If maybe you've done some of these things before, maybe you have not, but these can be helpful for determining those strengths. If you're sitting here even thinking, well, not only do I not know maybe a great word to use, I'm not really sure what I should say are my strengths. What are my traits and characteristics and talents and skill sets that are really going to be something that sets me apart. So there are different ways to do some strength spotting for yourself, to come up with some of those strengths and maybe the language to use. So one of them, if you've talked with me before, you've probably heard me mention Gallup-Clifton Strengths. I'm a pretty big fan. This is an assessment that allows you to learn more about your talent themes, and it gives you some great language and words. You can know more about yourself. This is an assessment that does cost a little bit of money to take, but there is a student price, and I am a certified coach and have a few codes as well that can be utilized with students. So if it's something that you're interested in, you can always make an appointment with me and we can talk about the potential of you actually taking the assessment to learn something about that. So the actual assessment you take is Clifton Strengths for Students. StrengthsQuest.com is where you can learn more information about that if you just want to explore on your own. It is the same assessment as just Gallup-Clifton Strengths. You might see kind of a book that you can buy that has a code with it as well. But you can do this on your own and just look at the reports and results, or you can also, as I said, meet with a career coach and go a little bit deeper, and I can be of assistance there. Another is the VIA Character Strength Survey. When we do the Truist Emerging Leaders Institute workshop that is offered in the spring and fall for our graduate students, one of the assessments we use there is the VIA Character Strength Survey, but you can also take a version of this on your own through viacharacter.org. Again, another place to get some of those words and language and strengths figured out for yourself. The Big 5 personality traits. So these are all kind of resources that you can either find on your own or explore, but that's another thing to think about, is like what the Big 5 are. You can Google this and it'll give you some ideas on how to figure out the Big 5 personality traits. The 300 question personality test, I think both of those things, Big 5 and 300 question, are both available on the truity.com site. So truity.com has a lot of different assessments for a lot of different things, but these are a couple of good ones that are, last time I checked, free to utilize, and might be a good way to do some of that strength spotting. The other thing that you can just do that is not an assessment or doesn't cost any money to do is just to do some of that sort of self-reflection, researching yourself. So the flow exercise is an idea of thinking about one example of something that you feel like was a great achievement, something you did really well, something that when you are doing it or when you were doing it, you just felt like you were in the flow. It became almost easy. It was natural. You were excited about it. You wanted to learn more. You wanted to go deeper into whatever it was that you were doing. If you can think about that time and then think to yourself about, okay, so when I was doing that, what skills was I using? What were my strengths? What were the things that were coming out that were a part of that experience? And oftentimes when you've been in that flow state, it's because you are using what naturally for you are your strongest traits, what your strengths are. So that can be a way to kind of do some self-exploration and think about that. The other thing, of course, you can do is to have someone else assist with this. Because if I, like right now, also asked you to think about someone else that you know that is a strong leader that you admire, and start to think in your head, what are some of their strengths? What are the things that you would say about them? You just want to take even a moment to think about that in your head. It wouldn't be too hard probably to come up with a list of some of their strengths, someone else's traits that you admire. So because it's sometimes hard for us to be that self-reflective, while these tools can help, it also can be a good idea to utilize someone else, someone that knows you well and could think of some of those positives that they could help explore with you. So they could tell you what they see in the way you interact, in the way you accomplish things, in the way you live your life, that are those strengths and traits and talents that are coming out. So you can do some self-reflection, or you can also bring someone else into the picture to kind of help you determine what these things are. Once you have this information, that's going to help you tell your story. And what I do hear from students is that not all, but some are thinking, well, I don't want to tell them some of these things. It sounds like I'm bragging, or I'm having to lay things out there that I don't normally just say to people when I introduce myself. I don't normally come up and say all the great things about myself, because that's not naturally maybe what we do. But if you don't tell your story, if you don't do that little bit of that explaining of your strengths, bragging, if you will, but I wouldn't think about it in that way, you're really explaining who you are and the value you can add to this person, to the organization and the position. So if you don't toot your own horn a little bit, if you don't tell your own story, no one else is going to do that for you. You may have recommenders, you may have people that would say, hey, you should really check out Mark, he's got all these great qualities about him, and they may give a little piece of that, but they're not going to tell everything. They're not going to be able to tell your story, and you would be the best person to be able to tell that story to someone else. So you have to be willing and able to do that. And I think you'll feel more comfortable doing that if you know that you have thought about these things and they really are your strengths and talents. They really are the things that make you unique, because then you're not just using hardworking, great communicator and good leader, and having to think, well, am I really those things, and how do I show it? You have thought about these things. You know that this is who you are, and you can be confident when you talk about those and tell your story. Another tool that I have for you, so in the chat for those of you on Zoom, I did put a link to a Google Doc, and I have that in hard copy here for those of you in the room. So if you all just want to take one and pass that around. This is another just possibility to do, people like to do things different ways. So if it's not just self-reflection, if it's not getting someone else, if it's not taking maybe an assessment online or something like that, you can also use this tool to help you out. So these are talking about strengths, traits, and transferable skills. So one side of this tool, or the first page of this tool, just gives you words, language that you can use. And hopefully it's a little bit more varied than some of the things that might automatically come to mind again when someone says, what are your strengths? What are your top skills? So these are some words that you can go through, and oftentimes the best way to do it is to really go with your gut feeling. Again, sometimes we hesitate to think about ourselves in certain ways, but if you go through this list and just circle, mark, underline the things that you feel like do describe you. You can do that very quickly on your own, and go through the list, and then go back to those ones that you have circled or indicated in some way. And then that's where you start thinking about it a little bit deeper. Which one of these, again, put me into that flow state. When I'm able to use this strength, when I'm able to, be someone who's motivating others, when I'm able to do that, that's where I'm in that flow state. And I hardly even know that I'm doing something difficult. So if that's the case, that's a starred one, right? Then that's some of those top strengths that are coming to mind. So if you've circled a lot, that's great that you have all those, but you do need to want to maybe narrow down to some of your strengths that are the strongest and that you want to let other people know about. So going back and reviewing and diving a little bit deeper into those that you've marked will help you maybe to come to what bubbles up to the top of the list. The other thing, of course, to do is keeping this list in mind. What things are going to be important for the field that you're going into, the work that you want to do, the type of role that you want to achieve and attain. And putting those two together will also help you know, okay, these are the things I also want to really emphasize, because these are going to help me do the work that I do. Now, don't get too caught up in thinking, okay, if I'm going to be an analyst, a data analyst, I need to be analytical and talk about analytical, and that's my top trait. There's probably some truth in some of that, but there's also a lot of different ways, different strengths that bring you to that same space. So if you are someone who is detail oriented, or things that, that you might not consider yourself to be an analytical person, but you have that trait, and that's how you get to the space of being able to successfully do the work that you do. So that's another kind of way to look at these words. The second page, or the flip side of that document, is more transferable skills kind of information. And so these are, again, more, instead of just single words, these are more skill sets or groupings of verbs, action verbs, that, again, are hopefully describing skills that you have, traits that you have in some way. And again, figuring out which ones you can mark on there will help you to brand yourself. So it might help you to change that resume up a little bit, or add some things to that resume. It might help you in the language that you're using when you're doing interviewing and introductions. So again, just another tool to try to do some of this self-reflection and self-assessment, exploration, research, to have everything ready for telling your story. Any questions about those assessments that I mentioned, or the tool, or kind of where we're going with this? Good. All right. Let me know if you do have any. So this is just a reminder, a plug, that you are very qualified candidates. You're getting wonderful degrees. You're adding to your skill sets in a variety of ways. So you will also be the qualified candidates, but just remember, it's not always the most qualified candidate. So if you over rely on that and just think, well, I've got this great education to back me up, it's not always the most qualified candidates who get hired. It's those that market themselves most effectively. So again, back to that, well, I don't like to brag about myself, or I don't know what to say. You have to be ready to tell your story, and you have to be the one that really knows what that brand looks like, how you want to market yourself, the ways that you want to tell that story. Because again, as we said, not only is no one else going to do it for you, but if you're not doing it, someone else is marketing themselves, and they're the person that's going to stick in that recruiter's mind. They're the ones that are going to pop up with that job offer that you might be really qualified for, and an excellent person to fit in that role, but they might not see it if you don't market yourself effectively. So that's why we're doing the things that we're doing and talking about that. So going more into that story piece, once we've got these kind of some of these words, this language with their strengths, we want to talk even more about what's in that story. Again, thinking about this from both a networking perspective and an interviewing perspective. When you think about what you're going to talk about, when you think about the skill sets that maybe you're going to bring up, the stories that you're going to use when they ask you some of these behavioral questions about, tell me about a time when, if you're going to really use this as part of your brand and your story, you want to be sure that you have asked yourself kind of some of these questions. So is it relevant? Not everything has to be like something that feels like it's a direct tie to the words on the job description, but is it relevant in the sense of, can you make the skill set that you're talking about, the strength that you're talking about, relevant to the role that you're applying for, the position that you're looking to achieve? How can it reflect in some way that job description and the skills mentioned? Is it going to be required for the role? Well, then you definitely know you want to be sure that it's part of your story. Will it add value for your ability to do the role? And maybe that's in a unique way that a recruiter might not have ever thought about. So it's a strength that you can bring up, and you can connect the dots for them on how it's relevant to the work that you will be doing. Is it accurate and true? So one of the biggest annoyances that employers tell us about is when candidates list skills on their resume, or when they introduce themselves, that they think are what that recruiter wants to hear about because it's, in that job description, or they think that that's a part of the job. So they just want to put it on there so they get past that AI, they get pulled to be someone that they're interviewing, and then they don't really have that skill. That's not something they can back up with being an accurate and true statement and having those demonstrations and those examples. So you want to be sure that if you decide that it's important, that you do build that skill if you don't have it, or that that's not what you're emphasizing the things that you do have. So obviously, honesty and truthfulness in that marketing materials is really important. but because you just want to be a true reflection of who you are. Ultimately, if it's not a true reflection of who you are, and for some reason you are able to pull the wool over their eyes and got into that role, you probably wouldn't be very happy or successful in it if you don't truly have, what it is that they're looking for and the things that are needed. So you just want to have it be a true reflection of you and your skills and kind of the level of your skills. Also, is it demonstrable? Can you provide examples? So that's linked back to being true and accurate with it. But it's not just that maybe you do have that skill, but how can you reflect that in the actions, as we talked about, not just what you say, but what you do to really showcase that. So particularly if it's an especially important skill or specific skill to the work that you want to do, it's right there in that job description as part of the requirements or things. You want to be sure that you have an example to give of how you have that skill set and how you've demonstrated it, because they will probably ask you some sort of question related to it, or it would be great to utilize their behavioral questions to show that you have that skill and trait that they're looking for. So one of the best ways to demonstrate the action that shows you have a skill is through the STAR method. You've probably heard that before if you've done any kind of interviewing sessions or anything, but we'll talk in the next slide just a little bit more about that STAR method, but that situation, task, action, and result. That's how you frame the story of giving the example that really demonstrates you have the skill that you say that you have and that they're looking for. And then finally, you can ask yourself, is it adaptable? There's certain skills that you've probably picked up in roles that you've had that are not the type of role you want going forward. But that doesn't mean that you didn't pick up skills and strengths and traits that could be adapted and relevant to the role that you do want to have. I talk about this often in resume writing, but if you identify skills that fit the profile of what they're looking for, and you feel like you gained that skill, but just maybe in a very different, role or very different way, you may have to do a little bit of, again, connecting the dots for them, that skill was a part of the work that you did and that it can transfer to the work that you're going to do. So like, for an example, you might not be wanting to go into sales or anything like that, but maybe you have had a retail job, working with customer service, working with sales. So maybe that's not kind of the exact skill set and strength that you're wanting to utilize every day in your new job. But in any role, of course, we know communication skills, the ability to work together on a team to accomplish a goal, the ability just to interface and explain something to others, all those things are going to be a part probably of any role that you're going to be in. So that's that transferable skill piece that you want to be sure that you're showing that it can adapt to the role that you're going for. And it may be that you have to connect the dots. Like that one was a pretty obvious one, but it may be that when you think about previous work experiences or volunteer experiences that you've done, you may have to dive a little bit deeper into thinking about, well, how does this skill set or strength really how it's going to help me? How can I use it with this new role and showcase that for an employer? The STAR method that I mentioned, I just like to give like a little bit of an example of that. So it's not just something we talk about, but I can show you a little bit more. So if you had a question of tell me about a time when you're facing a challenging situation. So these are the behavioral questions that tell me about a time when, and you can insert practically anything into the end there. But what they're really trying to learn about is your skill set, your set of skills, your strengths. And so you want to have those stories ready to go with examples, inputting in those skills that you've discovered through your self-reflection. So in this example, the situation was my service organization was in danger of losing its charter at the university. Membership was down and funds were low. So we're setting up the situation, maybe the problem, giving a little bit of background before we go into what the task was. So as fundraising chairperson, I was charged with the responsibility of increasing donations by 30%. So that's the task that you were setting about in this example to do for this challenging situation. So then the action that you took. In order to accomplish this goal, I initiated a door-to-door campaign off campus. All members were involved in the fundraising effort. So you're showing what you did personally, also incorporating in that it wasn't just you alone, that there was a team of members were involved in the fundraising efforts. And then you talk more about the skills. So I utilized my organizational skills. So that was one of the traits. You know that you're a very organized person. So I utilized my organizational skills to create a spreadsheet that planned where each team would go. I motivated our current members to prioritize these efforts. So remember that motivation was one of those things that you circled as a strength, and you know that you're in the flow and you're using that. And I delegated tasks to other members who had great skills in social media campaigns. So teamwork, leadership, you recognize something in others, you delegated another skill set that you're bringing out. And then some people leave it there, and it always feels then like when you're asking these questions that you've left the person hanging a little bit. So you do want to be sure that you do the R part, the result. And so that's, in this case, thanks to our membership dedication and participation, we increased donations by 37%. Now, you might not always feel like you have a successful result or like a huge result. It doesn't have to be fireworks display kind of result. You do just want to wrap things up though with letting them know what was the end result, or what did you learn or gain. So even if you had to say in this, with this challenging situation, we had, our members were really dedicated. We had good participation, but unfortunately there were some other extenuating circumstances. COVID happened and we couldn't do things in exactly the way that we planned. And so we didn't quite make our goal. We did increase by about 20%, but we have kind of some ideas of what we can do differently in this new situation to move that forward in the future. So we didn't achieve it, but we're talking about a result of something we learned. So that would be an example of that STAR method in use. Questions about that? All right, so then I wanted to spend some time on personal commercial, elevator pitch, whatever you'd like to call this. It's something that I think is important to think about ahead of time, to plan out a bit of what your goals are and what you want to say. Now, you don't have to come up with a memorized script, and I suggest avoiding a memorized script because inevitably things will just go awry in that, and you'll sound memorized. But you do want to have your goals and your ideas of what you would say as you introduce yourself in a personal commercial. And in addition to using this maybe in a networking situation is often where we think of that personal commercial, it's also great as you're set up for answering so tell me a little bit more about yourself as you sit down in that interview. That very first question, they just maybe have sort of broad and open to you. You can utilize this personal commercial here as well, maybe expanding on it a little bit more, but that can also be useful in that situation. So it may have seemed daunting in the past to think about introducing yourself and kind of creating a personal commercial. If you've gone through the steps we've already talked about with understanding what your strengths are, your selling points, and your brand, and you know kind of what you want to sell about yourself, this is going to become a whole lot easier to do the personal commercial. So some tips on here are, set your targets, think about who your audience is. So if you're going into a networking situation, who are you going to be talking to? What might they be interested in knowing about you? What might catch their eyes? You're talking to them, thinking about creating that commercial that accurately reflects you, but also meets the needs of whoever it is that you're talking to in your audience. What is your goal with that personal commercial? What are you trying to gain at the end? That also helps how to wrap it up or what the end asks are. So maybe that this is introducing yourself and you want to learn more about that company and something specific. So that's what you're trying to set up for in your personal commercial, is getting to that question at the end. Maybe it's your target is to really lay out there some of your skill sets to start that interview, and so they know some things about you. So we're thinking here about, in addition to that desired kind of outcome and the audience and tailoring some of the things maybe to that setting, you want to create that introduction. These are 3 questions that sometimes have been helpful for me. Who are you and where are you now? Where have you been and where are you going? And of course that can be interpreted in some broad ways. But this is where you can talk a little bit about, obviously, your introduction of who you are. That's kind of more that, I'm working on my MSADA and my applied data analytics graduate degree at Appalachian State. That's the who are you and where are you now. Even in this part of the question, you can possibly get out, I'm really enjoying my degree program because it's allowing me to use my analytical skills, or whatever it might be that you want to start getting in there as far as traits. Where have you been is not like your whole life history, because again, we know a personal commercial is going to be short and sweet. But where have you been allows you to go back and tell them a little bit of information about maybe an experience that you've had, or again, some of those traits and skills that make up who you are. And then the where are you going is that forward-looking piece of maybe what you're hoping to use these skill sets to do. What type of position or role specifically are you looking for? It might be more broad and just what you want to do in the future, but that sets up that where are you going kind of piece. Usually after you set the stage with the kind of that introduction, then that conversation can start flowing if you're in a networking situation. Of course, we'll move into questions if you're in an interview. You do want to add some depth to it. So usually like 1 to 3 sentences that talk about kind of wrapping into a ball, neat little tidy thing, your experience, strengths, traits, interests. That's kind of a good way to think about that. You also do want to think about engaging your audience. So whoever it is that you're talking to, if you do happen to know something about them, or potentially know something about them, can you do any kind of hook in there that is something that that they would find interesting? Maybe you happen to know that this person is an App State alum and they're a huge, App State baseball fan, or if you happen to hear somebody say that and you truly have an interest there as well, or something that aligns with that. Obviously, you already have the connection of App State students and alumni. But we're somehow work that into that conversation, maybe to give that person something to latch onto, and also maybe something a little bit memorable. Closing statement there, and you kind of always hope that you're maybe moving into a question at the end of a personal commercial so that conversation can keep going. So like one example might be, after you've told them about some of your traits and skills, I'm looking to learn more about potential full-time opportunities in marketing with organizations that place a value on sustainability. Maybe you talked about your work in a sustainability organization. Maybe you talked about some of your global kind of skill sets, and so you mentioned that you want to find an organization that works internationally. Can you tell me a little bit more about the types of positions at ABC organization that might be in that role of marketing and place an emphasis on sustainability? Hopefully you already know when you're saying that to someone that they are a company that does place an emphasis on sustainability. But that would be one way to go with the question. Or do you have any advice on the types of roles that I'm looking for and what I should be building up in terms of my skill sets? That's another way to be a little bit more general and not as specific with their company. Once you've thought about this and created kind of a framework for a commercial, it's a really good idea to practice in a safe space. So before you feel really like you're in that networking dinner, you're in a networking situation, before you're in that interview, you want to be sure that you give it a little bit of practice. So, utilize a friend, utilize me, utilize, a faculty member, someone that you know in the industry, but maybe you just have a closer relationship with, and test it out, see how it goes, get their feedback on, how your introduction went. Did you leave an image with them? Did they get an idea of who you are, what your story is? Did you give that brand image to them? Get a little bit of that feedback after you present them with your personal commercial. Again, if you don't want to ever go way out there and just come up with something absolutely off the rails, but anything that you can do as well with that hook piece, like that unique piece. So, if there's something that maybe not everybody else has done in terms of an experience, maybe that's what you want to work into that introduction, because they'll remember that, you were the one that, did that experience working with sea turtles, or whatever it was, something that may not even relate to the job you want to do, but if you can talk about some sort of skill or trait that is a part of that experience that is transferable, well, now you find a way to work in the fact that you can bring up this sort of unique piece about you that maybe will help them remember you. Has anybody like experienced doing kind of this personal commercial before and either felt like it went really well, or done some networking and maybe felt like you weren't quite so sure on that networking piece, and like maybe some questions about that personal commercial or introduction that we can tackle a little bit? Or on Zoom? Have people worked on personal commercials before or given it some thought ahead of time? Okay. Have you been able to practice it or put it into practice with anyone?
I always feel like I ramble
Okay.
when I talk, and that I talk too much, but also you want to give a lot of detail, again, like on who you are. So I feel like finding that line between it is very difficult for me personally.
Yeah. So I'm hoping the mic picked that up, but we're talking a little bit about, okay, wonderful. Rambling or feeling like where's that ending, or finding that balance is a challenge, which is why I think preparing ahead of time with some ideas of, okay, maybe, and threes is often that just nice right number. Like think of 3 sentences or 3 experiences that you want to hit on, or 3 strengths or traits, and know that you're hopefully going to have a chance to go into more things as they're hooked and as they're conversing with you more. Or in an interview situation, obviously you're going to be able to talk about other things and bring other pieces of your story and your brand into the questions that they ask. So that might be one way, is to kind of give yourself sort of a, here's kind of my 3 things that I'm going to talk about. Obviously practicing it and knowing, okay, I was able to say all that in 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, okay, great. If you find that you're going on for 5, 6 minutes when you're doing your introduction, that's going to be too long. You've lost them. Someone also wants to have a chance to even give you some information, especially if you're in that networking piece. They're hoping it's conversational as well. And sometimes also you just go with the flow, right? It might feel right in that situation to only talk about one thing and then ask a question, or it might feel right in that situation to bring up something different than you normally do. So you do have to read the situation a little bit, but I think giving just that practice a little bit, thinking ahead of time about what it is you want to hopefully get across to them, even if it is only that 3 minutes you have with them, that will kind of frame what you're saying and hopefully help with that a little bit. Also, we tend to be overly critical of ourselves when we think about that. When I do practice interviews with people and I'm asked them afterwards, usually, well, how did you feel about it? What did you feel like maybe went well, or what didn't go so well? Giving them a chance to give some feedback. I often get, well, I think I rambled, or I think I talked too long. And inevitably, that's not usually what I have. There are cases where that's true, but that's not usually what I've seen happen. It's just that we feel like, again, we're rambling or we're bragging or whatever, and so it went too long. As long as you're tying things together and maybe using that STAR method as well when you're answering questions, so that you have sort of a beginning, middle, and end to that story, you're probably doing just fine. You don't have to go with a timer and be like, oh, 30 seconds are done, I need to stop talking. And that's not it. It's more about, are you conveying that message in a way that fits with that situation, and it then allows that conversation to happen in networking situations. But yeah, so that would be one thing to consider when you're thinking about the rambling piece happening or not happening. Also with personal commercials, anytime you can, tie, you don't just want to say, I was in the sustainability club and, I did a project in business analytics on X. You want to tie it, whatever the experience is, with your skill, and hopefully even tie them together to create that brand. Obviously that cohesive brand is what we're going for. All right. So some other things, just tips related to networking and personal commercial type of thing, also can be used, of course, effectively in an interview, is that you want to be sure you're going in with some enthusiasm and positivity. Even if you're feeling a little bit out of your elements, even if you're feeling like this is not what you usually do, you're not usually the one that goes up and approaches someone in a room, when you're trying to network, that's kind of what you have to force yourself to do a little bit. So if you put a smile on your face, even if you're nervous, if you put that smile on, inevitably, even if we're doing this with masks and people can't see the smile, they're going to see it in the rest of your face, and you are going to feel more positive, more comfortable, more energized, enthusiastic. You might be trembling on the inside a little bit, but the more you can put that smile on, the more you're actually going to feel confident and do that conversation. If you are masked, or if you are on like virtual doing interviewing or networking, you may have to turn up the volume a little bit, not literally audio volume, but in your enthusiasm. I mean, not overly to where it's like kind of creepy or weird either, but you may have to be a little more exaggerated. They can't see all of you. They can't read you in the same way when you're just that head on the screen, or when you have the mask on. So you just might have to give it a little bit more of a concerted effort to think about, okay, I want to be sure that I do come across as positive and enthusiastic in this situation. Being prepared will also help you with kind of any of that nerves and things. But as I said earlier, prepared but not memorized. When you memorize something and are just giving that speech, people understand that and they see it, and it just doesn't create that interaction and conversation. And then inevitably, if you have something memorized, and then our brains, are thinking of the next steps in that memorized speech. And if something happens to throw you off and they interrupt you or ask you a question, or even something happens behind you, you'll get so off that you may not even remember anything that you were going to say. You might not remember who you are at that point if you get off of your memorized speech. So try not to memorize it, but just to have that preparation, that framework. The act like you live here is kind of referring to what I talked a little bit about with enthusiasm and positivity. And that is, I used to kind of say, fake it till you make it, like that fake smile and things. I wouldn't say fake it, but I would say trust yourself and tell yourself, okay, I can do this. I belong here. I'm not, out of place in this room. I'm the person who is in the space where I can control and have, a say in what it is I'm about to say. So if you act like you live there, if you kind of assume that you belong where you are, it allows you to act in a more confident way. It allows you to kind of put that persona forward a little bit more. You're going to feel more at home and comfortable and taking on the role in your mind of marketing yourself and giving that brand pitch. Pitch is only half the goal. So we've focused a lot on what you might say or how the things that you're going to say, but active listening is obviously really key in networking, in making those relationships and connections. And so you do want to be sure that you are cutting yourself off a little bit if you need to, that you are coming to that question or that ask, that then you are allowing time to be an active listener. That'll help the conversation keep going. It makes people also feel heard. It's great if you can then remember those things about that person and, connect to them in some way. So they'll get to know the type of person you are, but you'll also be connecting on that human interaction level. So definitely understand that the pitch is not just a pitch. It's not just about you getting every strength that you've decided you want to say into that conversation. It's also that active listening piece. And that can also help you read the room a little bit and the situation and know, oh, here would be a good time to talk about this because something that they mentioned and that you heard. And then afterward, after you make some of these connections, maybe at a networking event, be sure that you don't just leave it as, okay, I introduced myself to 8 people in the room. Now I'm just going to sit back and wait for the magic to happen. You want to be sure that you are taking action afterward as well. So one of those things would be jotting down some notes for yourself or however you want to do that. So maybe after it's done and you can leave that room, or even if it's a type of networking event where you can go to the side and just make yourself a note on your phone, or if they've given you a business card, if you're in person, you can jot something down on a piece of paper. If you're on Zoom, of course, you got the ability to sort of make some jot down notes right there while you're not actively talking to them, but while you're kind of finishing up that conversation. And then it's great to, of course, follow up on LinkedIn, connect with them there. Depending again on the situation, and if you've hopefully gathered their contact information, sending them a thank you or saying, you know, it was so great to meet you. I enjoyed talking about Appalachian State baseball with you, as well as the opportunities at your company and that kind of thing. So they'll remember who you are. Keeping that connection going and sharing, you know, things back with them is really great. LinkedIn is a good way to do that, because once you've made that connection, then if you see something on LinkedIn that you're like, oh, that reminds me of when I talked with John about that, you can share something with them on LinkedIn, or, you know, make some sort of connection back with them that way. All right, so we have basically finished up our time. I do want to mention that you want to put all these things into practice and action now. A great opportunity to do this, maybe after you've done some of this self-reflection and things, is to do some practicing at Walker Spring Connect, our fair that'll be in March. That's March 24th. At the beginning of March, though, we're doing offering practice interviews with recruiters and some alumni. So it's not just me giving you feedback. You would actually get to get some feedback from a recruiter. It might or might not be anyone that you would ever be interested in working for. But small world would be one thing, and then it's still a connection and a networking kind of thing. And then you're going to learn something from that experience. You're going to get to put these things that we've talked about into practice. So if you're interested, I sent out some information in the newsletter, but you can sign up on the Business Career Services website under the Career Fair tab. There's information about practice interviews. It's pretty easy to click on it, see what's available in terms of time slots, and just sign up for one of those. It will tell you like who the person is and what company they're with. Yes, when you sign up for that. These are being done virtually this year, the practice interviews. So it just takes, 30 minutes of your time. It gives you a really 30 to 40 minutes of time, gives you a really great feedback on practicing what we've just talked about. They are filling up fast, and we only have a limited number of spots. So I would suggest getting on there and signing up as quickly as you can. And then let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, so I want to be sure to leave time here for anybody that has any questions. If there's anything you want to put into practice, if somebody is so brave and wants to, test out their personal pitch or something that they would say, happy to do that as well. But I will stop talking and see what you all have as questions. I can also always do practice interviews as well, I should say. I'm happy to do that. It's great, though, to get some of that other perspective of an actual recruiter with this opportunity that we have coming up. And for those of you that are going to be here working on your degree for a little while, we try to do the practice interviews. And of course, there's networking events and career fairs in both the fall and the spring. That's my LinkedIn QR code. If you have not linked and connected with me yet, I would suggest that you do that. Building up your connections on LinkedIn. I should also mention, actually, that reminds me with LinkedIn, these words that we talked about, these strengths and traits and language that you can develop, it's also really great to utilize on your LinkedIn page, on your profile. The About section can be a really good place to think about that About section is kind of like your personal commercial on LinkedIn. So when someone comes to find you on LinkedIn, that's usually they're seeing your picture, they're seeing your title, and they're going to that About section. They may or may not actually even go down into the resume and experience section yet, depends on what they see there. So that About section is your chance to brand yourself. It's your chance to start that personal commercial. Give yourself a bit of an introduction, get some of that language in there about your strengths, your transferable skills, your story. Really great place to utilize that. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining. If you are physically in the room, I just realized that I think I've got you all, if you logged in, you went through the registration online, so I don't need that, but I'm going to need to get your names just real quick, just so I have that for class credit, if that's why you are here today. So thank you.
Would you mind if I filled out the registration at this point?
I'm sorry. Can I fill
out the registration now, or is that closed?
Well, when you first logged in to come into the Zoom meeting, did it have you put your name and your student ID?
Nope.
Okay, so it did not do that. Okay, I'm gonna make a quick note then of our participants online, and I will just have that information. So
Thank you.
shouldn't be a problem. Thank you though for letting me know that.
I do have a question about
Yes.
like the self pitch.
Uh-huh.
Like how good are we supposed to make ourselves out? Like there's like the good things about you, but like how are you trying to come across? Are you trying to come across kind of like more entitled, or are you trying to be like humble, like, oh, I do these like great things and I've achieved stuff, but like I'm humble at the same time?
Yeah, well, you definitely want to be authentic, and you don't want to come across as cocky or, you don't want to get to that bragging level. I think people often interpret talking about themselves as bragging. That's not always the case, but you don't want to get to the level where all you're doing is saying, and I did this great thing, and I did that great thing, and I did this great thing. You also want to avoid though going too far to the humble side, because then of course you're not telling your story, you're not getting out there what is great about you and what are your strengths. So I think you want to be authentic, and you want to go in somewhere in that middle ground of knowing these are my strengths that I'm relaying to this person. And so and that's what they're interested in knowing about me. So I think, I don't know if that helps or makes sense, but that authentic place of, deciding what are your strengths and how can you illustrate those a little bit without, trying to go all the way to I saved the world kind of thing. You also can incorporate, as you answer maybe questions in an interview or in the STAR kind of method, is that more often than not, when you've accomplished something, you haven't done it all on your own. So you want to emphasize what you've done and the strengths you've used to get there, but also incorporate how that worked as part of a team or a group as well. So that can be one way to humble that a little bit, or to make it in that realistic space. In that personal commercial, personal pitch, I think it's a little bit more about, just explaining, hey, here's what I've been involved in, because I've discovered I have some really great skills in, like we talked about motivating others. So I've used that really well in my involvement with the Sustainability Club to motivate our group to achieve a couple of the goals that we set out to do. So, that's more, instead of saying, I'm the greatest motivator that ever lived kind of thing, you're using an example that shows how you are what you say you are. And so then that shouldn't go to that bragging level. It goes more to the authentic level.
Thank you.
Does that help a little bit with that?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm thinking kind of like, yeah, this is what I have done, this is what I can do, this is what I want to do.
Exactly. Yep. You can, this is not a prescription of how a personal commercial or pitch can be. It's a framework, because a lot of people get a little bit into the, well, what do I say? Do I give my whole life history, or, so this is a framework, but however you think is a good framework for you is really good to do, and just have thought about that ahead of time, about that framework of, and here's a little bit of basically giving them a little bit of background of your strengths and who you are, and how that can be helpful, hopefully, in the positions that you're trying to go for.
Yeah.
Yep. Great
Thank you.
question. Thank you. Any other questions or things? All right.